Howdy, my name is Waylan Cain. I was born on 10 December 1967 in Fort Knox, Kentucky. But I was born to Max Cain and my mother Joy Cain, and he was in the Army. So we were stationed there, and then basically at about 2 to 4 weeks we actually moved down back to Texas, where both of my parents are from. I spent the rest of my life growing up there until I joined the Marine Corps, and then left Texas back in 1991. Did a bunch of different things, then moved back 3.5 years ago, which would be 2021. I started Texas A&M after, in the fall of 1986, after graduating from high school in the spring. And I was in the Corps Cadets, Company D1. Our moniker at that time was the Devils. We were Devil D. And you start the Corps Cadets with about 30 guys. Okay, it was not integrated as it is this time with male and female together. 30 guys or so, and you start in a class, and you're in an outfit, and so it's kind of like a company. And then you have like a bit of your own culture, a bit of your own motivational jodies and songs that you would sing, a bit of your own traditions. But then that rolls up into about a 2,000 person Corps Cadets in a school of about 40,000 undergraduate. Right, so that kind of shows you the size of kind of what we're in. But you get thrown together in the Corps Cadets with a bunch of guys I probably wouldn't have been friends with if I had to pick them, but they became my brothers over the next 4 years. And over that next 4 years, those 30 guys dwindled down to about, there's 13 of us that finally graduated. And so you become like, you become brothers, you learn to love people that you would probably not have chosen yourself. And so even to today, we still get together, we do things. Now that I live back in Texas, it's really nice getting back in touch with them, because our paths parted for about 30 years, and now we're back together physically, and it lets you reconnect with those guys. But one of the things that really influenced me about going into the Marine Corps was the experience I had as a freshman in the Corps of Cadets. So my unit was aligned to the Navy and the Marine Corps ROTC. Texas A&M, you can go into Army ROTC, Air Force ROTC, or Navy Marine Corps. And I went to the Navy Marine Corps one. And one of the neat things there for me, and I take a little bit of pride for it, is like the Marine cadets were very sharp. They wore their uniforms well, and as you continue on in the Corps Cadets and through school, like in your, as a sophomore, as a junior, and then a senior at Texas A&M, you go through different Marine Corps schools. Right, and they come back from those even more refined and more polished and more, disciplined. And I could see that as a freshman, and that's what really made me gravitate to where, like, yeah, I'm not really worried about flying. I'm not really worried about this. I want to be one of those Marine guys. My freshman year, an experience there that I had that also solidified that I wanted to be a Marine is, while most people were going home to families over the Christmas break, I decided to go to a week-long Marine orientation trip to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And so instead of going there, they didn't feed to us or cater us or anything else like that or make things easy. In fact, we showed up, they issued us a rucksack, a tent, a couple of different things, weapons, and we hiked everywhere we went. I mean, they treated us just like, hey, you're coming here, you're going to do Marine Corps stuff. We got to shoot cannons there with them. We got to ride in Amtrak. So we basically did celestial navigation, and we froze our butts off because, that's just what you do in the Marine Corps, because the cold weather gear is not necessarily, going to help you out in the cold. And so, but the one thing, there's a gunnery sergeant there. His name was Gunnery Sergeant Hall. And he's the one who brought us through that whole evolution. At the very end of it, you were about to leave, and all of a sudden he walks out of the CP, the command hut, and he's dressed in his blues, right? So if you've ever seen a picture of a Marine, you have kind of a khaki shirt, blue trousers, you have the red blood stripe. It doesn't match, but it does. And he comes out there and he just gives us a speech, and talks about whenever your young daughter's going to come up to you and give you a hug, but you're in uniform, and you say, "Get back," because you don't want her to mess up your uniform. That's when you know that you're a Marine. And I remember that he said it a little bit more explicatives and other kind of, flamboyant kind of vernacular. But it hit with me, and that's kind of, what, I want to be a Marine. I'm not worried about this flying stuff or anything else like that. There's a tradition that came about with yell leaders. Right, so Texas A&M would have yell leaders. There's 5 of them. There's no cheerleaders. Aggies don't cheer, they yell. And so there's 2 juniors elected in the junior year, and I actually put my name in the hat for those and ran and campaigned on that and actually got elected to be a junior yell leader. So I did that. I did my Marine Corps duties. I was also selected to be a Ross Volunteer, which is part of the honor guard for the governor of the state of Texas. So did that as well as my Corps Cadet stuff, and I did a little bit of academics there. Stayed in school, didn't get kicked out or anything else like that. So it was a very big junior year for me, which culminated in the summer between my junior and senior year. After getting elected to head yell leader and selected for head yell leader my senior year, I went to officer candidate school in the Marine Corps. So while at Texas A&M, I did get exposed to marine aviation, and so just to maybe keep my options open, one of the active duty Marines who was stationed there at Texas A&M to kind of advise the Corps cadets and people like that and Marine option cadets like me said, hey Waylan, why don't you look at this flying thing in the Marine Corps and you can take a test. It's called the AQT FAR. And so I took it and I did pretty well on it. But what I did not do is continue to follow on through to that, because in the Marine Corps you can apply and almost sometimes, and actually you can get a guaranteed flight slot in the Marine Corps. That's the only service that does that. But I didn't follow through with that. And so I went into the Marine Corps basically going to be a ground option, meaning, you know, because usually you have to have a guarantee for aviation to get it, otherwise you're going to go and be in the ground, which was fine with me because I really liked the ground stuff. And the thought of being an infantry officer in the Marine Corps was really appealing to me. During that time, most people who have ground contracts or ground options, they will basically, you know, you take a lot of tests, physical, mental, you know, and different things, and there's different assessments done to you, and then basically based on your performance at the basic school, you can choose which military occupational specialty that you go to, or mustering. The same thing was what the RAF says. And so I was looking, you know, doing pretty well, and I kind of, hey, I want to go infantry. But then at the very end of the basic school, after this 6 months, it's like, hey, someone announced to our class that, hey, there's like maybe 2 or 3 aviation slots available for those of you who may want to apply. I'm like, wow. I took that test. I did pretty good. There is this option to go do that. And then ultimately I came out to the decisions like, you know what, I can go fly and come back to the ground and kind of do some ground billets, you know, on my career. But it'd be very hard if I went infantry or a ground billet, not that that was guaranteed to me, it'd be very hard to go fly after that. So I said, hey, you know what, I'm gonna go do this aviation thing. So that kind of closes a loop with the whole Top Gun movie. It didn't totally influence me to go do that, but it's almost like this option. Plus the thing is flying is pretty neat. Right, and that option to be able to do that, it's kind of like something I wasn't expecting. It's there. It's like, okay, God, are you talking to me? And ultimately now I look back at it, I know He was. If you reach a point where you're like, you know what, if I work a little bit harder, I can actually achieve something I never thought I could achieve before. Right? Because again, in my mind, I'm a bodunk kid from Conroe, Texas, right, which is really kind of a country bumpkin place. And now I have this chance that I can maybe fly jets in the Marine Corps. And so at that point is where I'm like, man, I'm all in. And my wife, good on her, she was like, hey, go do it. And so I was spending ultimate times up, a lot of time up at night, you know, from 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock whenever the simulator closed, trying to practice things that I would go execute the next day and get graded upon. And then the same thing in the next flying, right, the actual live flying and stuff like that and get graded upon. So basically, I was all in on it. And then ultimately at the end of that primary stage of flight training, I was able to select jets. And so in the Marine Corps and the Navy, after that primary flight training, you go jets, you would go props, which is more like KC-130s, C-130s, P-3s, you know, for the Navy folks, or helicopters, right? And so I was able to select jets. And then a funny story about that is being from Texas, you know, there's actually flight schools to continue on your intermediate flight training, you know, in the jet pipeline in Mississippi. But there's also one in Texas. There are actually 2 in Texas at the time. And one thing I neglected to say is my wife, we went ahead and she got married before she finished her university degree. But ultimately, you know, just as things work out, you know, God's hand was in it, and we went up there to Meridian, Mississippi. Had a great time, a very close, tight-knit group of Navy and Marine Corps flight students up there because you're kind of in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. But we loved it up there. And so at that point, I went through intermediates. So the airframe there was a T2. It looks like a guppy. They kind of call it. It's a twin-engine straight airplane, like intermediate fighter intro, almost like the Mackie for the RAF folks back in the day. And then I also went through advanced and flew the A4 Skyhawk. It was a TA-4, a trainer version. It had a tandem cockpit. We had a couple of single seats out there, but again, it's the same, virtually the same airplane that was a Vietnam-era bomber and attack aircraft. Did that, and again, the same thing there, learning how to study, learning how to fly an airplane and achieve and be in front of it, not behind it. Fly the airplane, don't let it fly you. I got to the very end of that, and then you come to another selection point for the Marine Corps. You can fly F-18s, you could fly Harriers, or you could fly EA-6B. And those are kind of the precursor to the Growler now. It's an electronic warfare airplane. The way it would work as far as workups to go and get trained to go land on the aircraft carrier, you would bounce at the airfield. They would actually paint the representation of an aircraft carrier, the deck, but then also the actual landing zone on the deck. So the deck's pretty big, right? Not as big as a runway, but the landing space that you're going to actually come in is very, very small. And so you basically practice like 10 or 12 sorties of coming in, just being very, very precise, landing on a very small section of the asphalt, or the bitumen, which is part of the runway, and you had to be at the right attitude, right airspeed, and you just practice that and practice that. That's great, because, okay, that's pretty easy. You're over land, you know, okay, I'm going to come back and I'm going to land and roll out on runway. But I remember launching out out of Florida and going out there and flying on the wing of one of our instructors. And then I remember seeing that boat for the very first time. I'm like, oh, mate, that thing is so freaking small. And man, my heart went up into my throat. And it's like, holy cow, what are we going to do? And so about that time when I was going over to Operation Southern Watch in Kuwait, I applied for the exchange tour with the RAF, and I was actually granted it. And so basically mid-year, summer in the Northern Hemisphere, I was notified, hey, you're going to come over. I didn't know it was 75 Squadron at the time, but I was notified that I was going to be able to come and do the exchange tour over here with the Royal Australian Air Force. So we got the kids ready, got everything done, we got packed up, we flew down, we flew down to Canberra, checked in at the embassy right there, because they track all the different, they call it a personnel exchange program, and then got there, bought a Land Cruiser, okay, and then basically we started up the coast of, the east coast of Australia, because we had planned out this trip, and ultimately it actually worked out this way, where we drove up, you know, from Canberra, hit the coast, drove all the way up to just south of Cairns, drove across to Normanton, drove down to Mount Isa, across to, is it Tennant Creek, I believe, then up the Stewart Highway, and that's how we got into RAF Base Tyndall whenever we showed up. We showed up in Canberra on September 1st or 2nd of 2001. So we did our check-in and we started north, and we were in Sydney. We had been able to book accommodation down close to the Opera House and everything on September 11th, actually September 12th. Right, and so sure enough, we wake up in the morning, take the kids down to Brekkie, and you know, we're looking, what's that on, you know, the newspaper there? What's that on the telly? And then sure enough, okay, I asked Randy to take the kids back upstairs, and I'm like, she's like, well, you're not coming up? Just give me a second. So she took them upstairs, and so I actually looked real hard at it, and yeah, it's true. So 9/11 happened while we were there in Sydney on our way out to our posting. Very surreal time, right, for us. And then actually after we got back with a lot of my mates who were still back, you know, at Miramar, right, doing squadron operations, they had a total different experience than we did, because they were on lockdown, no flying. A lot of those guys were flying cap, you know, with armament over Los Angeles, right, over your own home turf. So they were doing that, but I'm sitting here with a family in Australia, just driving out, not a whole lot of communications, not a lot of, you know, back to the embassy and stuff, asking, hey, are you going to make me go back or what? So we had a pretty reflective day, that day in Sydney. Even though it was an outside perspective, and I was still wearing the Eagle Globe and Anchor of the Marine Corps, I was a magpie, you know, and so I abided by, you know, the Australian rules of engagement, the appropriate standard operating procedures and tactical operating procedures of the unit. And then, you know, we worked up and we did a couple different deployments and some, I'll say some survival training and things like that. And then we basically got ready, and the unit deployed from RAF Base Tyndall with an augment of aircraft and personnel from other squadrons from 3 and 77 to make sure we could have Yeah, a full-up contingent, so we could do, if we needed, we could actually do round-the-clock ops when we were over there on operations. So we did that. The squadron got over there. Just like any movement, there's things that that don't go totally according to plan. But I look at it from a prism of what I did in the Marine Corps. I mean, it's so professional. We did normal squadron rotations. We thought it was really, really cool that the RAF actually took off, around the Christmas holidays and around mid-year, and let people go from, especially a remote location like Tyndall. And so we took advantage of that. People were like, oh, did you go to New Zealand or anything? No way. Australia is huge. Why would we go anywhere but Australia? So from a family side, one of our first big things that we went to is we went to Tasmania. We stayed for 3 weeks over the Christmas holidays. A bit long, but it was great. We got to go around the whole island. I got to go see a Sydney to Hobart race come into Hobart there. And we found out that we were pregnant with our fourth while we were there in Tasmania. Right, and so that's going to be Stuart, who was born in 2002. So we did Tasmania, we did places to Brisbane, we went out to Perth, we went out to Broome, we actually drove out to Broome. We went to Sunshine Coast when we were in Brisbane, went one time down to the Gold Coast, so that's kind of like a little bit of the Cain family around Australia. Just fell in love with it. And then of course, like we had a Land Cruiser, like I told you, so we would go bush, with friends, we'd go camping, we'd go find just a little place like Litchfield National Park. We just spent a lot of time up there, and just there's no end to things you want to do out in the Northern Territory if you wanted to. So we took advantage of that. We're there one day, and all of a sudden I get this bring bring, and it's Mel Hupfeld. I'm like, "Hello, sir. What's going on?" It's like, "Hey, Raisin, I see that you're supposed to be back off of your leave on this date. Will you be back in Tyndall on that day?" I'm like, "Yes, sir, I will." "Why do you ask?" He's like, "Nope, just checking. We'll talk whenever you get here." And so I'm like, all right, here we go. I'd done quite a few deployments. I'd seen some things happen, before, and operational things like that. So I kind of thought that could be indicative of something else that's going to happen from a RAF perspective, and that 75 Squadron was going to be a part of it. So sure enough, that kind of was what the case was. And so I think it's public knowledge now. It's like, all of us air crew came back, the whole squadron came back, I should say, after the Christmas holidays, and we started getting into workup cycle to go over to deploy as part of OIF-1, the contingent from the RAF that went over there and flew in operations in OIF-1. And so that was quite an interesting time. Nothing focuses the mind like the prospect of imminent combat, right? And so from an infantry person, where you're going to stand like we are from each other, and you're going to be doing the deed, it definitely focuses you. And then, but from an aviation perspective, it does as well, right? Because where the weapons, the instruments of war are different whenever you're looking someone in the eye, they're just as lethal as they are in the air from a surface-to-air perspective and from an air-to-air perspective. And one of the interesting things for me in this time was like, I'd been over to Operation Southern Watch. There was not a very kinetic fight. There wasn't a lot of shooting and I'll say dropping of bombs, but that was happening out there. So having been exposed to that, and just some of the different training that we do in the Marine Corps, it was interesting and really neat to watch 75 Squadron and the RAF gear up and get the squadron ready to go over there and be ready for whatever contingency was going to come. And so it was really neat to be a part of that, provide a different perspective in, and have a voice that was listened to by the squadron, and then provide my perspective, because it was an outside perspective. So we get over into, okay, I'll say the desert, the MEAO, the Middle East area of operations. And it's the big buildup, right? People saw that on the news. So we were at one place. I was a Marine exchange with 75 Squadron. 75 Squadron had just had an exchange go over to the Marine Corps. Is flying with one of my old units, and we would go have some conversations with them. And actually one time, a lot of us from 75 Squadron and the operations group that was working, we flew up into Kuwait and talked to the Marine Corps guys, right? Because I was like, I tried to, hey boss, we should probably go just talk to them, because the Marine Corps had a sector, the Air Force and the Army had a sector, and then we would be flying, and you really don't know on whenever your operational tasking is where you're going to go from a day to day. And even if you do, are you supposed to go over to the Marine sector, you could get changed over to the Army and the Air Force sector. So this is kind of a story of one of those different things that we did was we went up there and we landed at the Marine Air Group facility, and I got to go reorient myself with a 225, the Vikings, the squadron I just left. The Bats were there, and a bunch of other squadrons that I knew, and a bunch of guys there. So we actually had a whole lot of time to talk to each other. And again, bringing my new squadron mates to the RAF there and introducing them, we created relationships there that still today, you know, for the fact that, you know, we have this exchange program between our countries. I mean, it's really something that pays back, and you never know where you're going to get the full value of that relationship. So we did that, made the connections. We come back. We're still planning. We're actually able to fly and kind of do a little bit of readiness as well from an air-to-air refueling perspective, because there's different types of air-to-air refueling tankers, different ways to kind of air-to-air refuel off of them, and you never know what you're going to get whenever you're up there waiting to go into country and you need some gas. So you have to be ready to be able to tank off of everybody. And it's funny that I'm talking about air-to-air refueling being one of the main things to get into country to do your business, but it's a pretty big deal. It's very unforgiving. So we had some good times doing that. So we kind of prepared ourselves, but then whenever finally, you know, CENTCOM, you know, Central Command, said, hey, we're going, we were there. We were ready. I was sitting duty supervisor for the first wave that went out. So we were out flying shortly after some of the other people that were at our base went actually and broke some things down from an IADS perspective. And then the squadron just continued on operations for, I want to think it was about 3 to 4 weeks. And we would go up and we would fly. Initially, we were supposed to be defensive counter-air just to make sure none of the Iraqi Air Force assets flew, which they never did. And then shortly after that, we changed over to time-sensitive targeting, to where we could basically, we would be up there on cap, and if somebody needed, hey, there's something moving down here, we need to drop a couple of bombs on it, suppress it, destroy something, hey, let's call up, you know, 75 Squadron folks. We would use tactical call signs and stuff like that, and we would actually go and prosecute targets. Sometimes pretty close proximity to friendlies, but not very often. Oftentimes you're up there, you're just deconflicting yourself with other aircraft that are working the area. So we do time-sensitive targeting. But then towards the latter couple of weeks, we were actually going up there and we were actually doing kind of close air support and what we call armed reconnaissance, to where someone, usually either Army or Marine, or maybe a coalition asset, maybe SAS, would have eyes on something they wanted us to take care of. And so we would check into country. Someone would say, whatever your call sign is, I want you to talk to this person on this frequency. I want you to go to this region, and this little keypad. That's kind of the way we divvied up target sets, and talk to this person for further tasking. And so you just go in there, you drive in, you talk to the person, they tell you where to look, you'd find something, you say, is that what you're looking for? Yes, it is. Get a positive identification, and then it meets my ROE here, and then you just employ weapons on it. And we do that for quite a while until things just settled down, because we were able to take over the country in pretty short order. Anyway, so there's a lot of smaller discussions in there. You know, if you want me to, there's a couple of them I could tell you if you want me to do that, but ultimately, the squadron did amazing. We achieved, I believe, the national objectives, right, as well as operational and tactical objectives. And then we were able to redeploy with style with all of our people, all of our material, and get back, you know, to Tyndall. And then it was interesting. Once we got back to Tyndall, Johnny Howard was waiting on us. And so a few of us came back to Tyndall. We landed early because, again, you kind of piecemeal back as well, because you have different air-to-air refueling assets that have to pull you back. A couple of us got back early, and then the full squadron came back on like a commercial airliner and came in there to the base ops there at RAF Base Tyndall. And everybody gets out there, and anyway, it's a pretty big party. But a lot of us were able to go back over to the crew room at 75 Squadron, and certain political dignitaries were there just to say thank you. And it was kind of a really neat time to kind of see that level of national attention on the squadron, right? And then, yeah, it was really special. And one of the other reflection points on that too, for me, is that there wasn't, and this is what was told to me, there was not a fighter squadron that had been deployed in combat from the RAF since the Korean War. I think there was bombers and some other type of aircraft and maybe fixed-wing aircraft like that in Vietnam, but from a fighter perspective, this was the first combat deployment since the Korean War. So looking back over, there's differences, but there's also national objectives. And as a military person, you're an instrument of the state, right? You're basically there to impose the will of your government on the enemy, and that's what we did. I've always said God's first, my family's second, and all these other kind of things. But like, the service will take you 24/7 if you let it. And even if you don't say it, you're a Marine and you're kind of wed to the Marine Corps as well as I'm wed to my family. And it's just a constant balance of going back and forth to that. So it makes it very hard to step away. I reckon it's the same thing from a RAFI or anybody else, because you're part of an elite club, right? You find identity in that. You find motivation. You find a lot of different things that'll get you through tough times, being anchored in that Marine Corps, or let's say that RAF ethos, right, of being a warfighter. Probably the biggest thing that's kept me driving the way I've been driving is faith, and it is faith in God, through my Savior Jesus Christ. So I believe that. I believe that I was made for something, and I believe that I'm still experiencing that, and I'm still trying to discover that, and I'm going to discover that all the way until I take my last breath. So I really do believe that, and so does my wife, Randy. And so that's one of the things that we have tried to strive for in all the different decisions in our lives. We're not perfect, made a lot of mistakes along the way, but whenever you have that defining goal for you and your partner, in this case for me with Randy, and you're both going towards it, the closer you are to that, the closer you are to God, the closer I am to God, the closer I am to my wife, because she's also pursuing the same thing. So that common goal, I guess I'll say, and for us, right, is pursuit of God, and what we believe that He has brought us here for, has kept us going the right direction. But there's other things that have helped that, right? My friends, my mates, having people that force me to grow, right? I don't think we're stagnant. That's another thing. I really do think we're going to grow all the way until the very end. I think that's probably the biggest thing that's been that. In regards to preserving the stories of our veterans, I think it is very, very important that we do not forget where we've come from. Because if you don't look at the past, look at the good and the bad and the mistakes, and have some type of force that's going to drive you to do better, you're doomed to commit those mistakes of the past. And so from a veteran's perspective, I think probably another element of that is the loyalty to your nation, the loyalty to your mate, and those kind of things. From a loyalty perspective and doing the right things together, you're going to do a lot more than you can by yourself.